Greetings, my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, licensed presenters, the Core New Core, my patrons, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor or student. So, my titles today are just two titles today. The first one is beads, as in beads, okay, and hoses, as in, right, I've got to get better at figuring out how to look right through from the lens of the camera. I think it's there. And then this. And then, see? Right? See? You can see through the hose. And more so, that this hose, the little white stuff you see, that's stitching that's reinforced. And that's because it's a hydraulic hose. But I get ahead of myself, I think. Beads and hoses, number one title. And then the number two title is a question. Is Pilates only folklore? So, assuming you are familiar with CT and MMP, I don't usually do that, but assuming that you are, what is it and how do you do it? Or what is it? And then if you know the four-word definition, it's oppositional rotation between axes. And each of these points in the Michael Miller trademark is the end of an axis of rotation in our body that we're capable of articulating, that we're capable of creating a rotational dynamic. And so the end of those axes are endpoints, common name for the end of an axis. And in MMP, with oppositional rotation between axes, it's the tension that you create between any two axes, especially ears to shoulders and shoulders to hips, because there's nothing structurally connecting them other than the spine. But I go too deep. Beads and hoses. So what is core new tension? We know the definition. Now how do you make core new tension? Oppositional rotation between axes. Like you do this in your body. You make this kind of effort in your body. Now is that the way you do it, hips to shoulders? It is, isn't it? Because this is how the hips have their strength, and this is how the shoulders carry their strength, and how shoulders and hips connect to one another in oppositional rotation between axes. That's core new tension. You heard it from me first. So, to create core new tension, you have to have the ability to make the rotational dynamic in order to create a grip that allows this to happen in the engagement. And to the extent that you can refine and articulate the rotational axis that you're engaging in, the rotational dynamic that you're engaging in, the more refined or better the grip in order to make more tension. Okay? So yesterday, I was talking about I wanted beads or pieces of a vertebra to show that what happens when you get this and you make tension is that when you make the grip like so, and you make length like so, you get the separation of the vertebra, the decompression of the vertebra. Now, I'm not saying radical distances, but I'm saying that the tension does this to your spine, and the way you get that tension is through oppositional rotation between axes. Hips to shoulders and shoulders to ears. I went into a store looking for beads and didn't find what I was looking for, and there in my automobile console there were these prayer beads. So I had to drill holes a little bigger to get the beads to get the string to go through, and then I'd pull this apart and they would all slide down to the bottom. So I used toothpicks to create a jam in each bead so that they stayed in place when the tension was placed. See, to be able to show you this. Core tension, gripping from here to here, making that tension in your body muscularly, is eccentric in the very nature of it, and puts your spinal column under this kind of tension. So now I have my new new toy to make demonstration of making tension between 2 points. How do you do that? Well, in MMP, it's not just within MMP. Michael Miller, me, points to the biodynamics that are going on in the body, saying, look, that's what's happening. Now, whether it's a big deal to you or not, or doesn't matter to you or not, in the MMP point of view, in pursuing number 2, which is contrology develops the body uniformly, that's taken to mean whole body, that it's a whole body effort. And the way to get to whole body engagement is through core tension. That's my contention, or that's my profession. That core tension just is what it is. And knowing that and being able to engage in that is the way to most ideally, or most efficiently, not ideally, most really minimize the weight of your body moving through space by how uniformly your musculature is engaged. So now we get to hoses, okay, and I use this a lot to say in Pilates we want whole body, and if this happens in our body, we lose the uniform distribution of the load that we're trying to maintain. When you break at the back, meaning that your joints go like this, rather than maintain the effort or the energy or the means of engagement of being uniformly engaged. So I saw another picture on the reformer in this reformer arabesque drastic extension where the chest is pressed against the thigh in this huge extension with a needle-esque leg up. It's in that extension down like this, coming out of it. It's in that crease at the hip that it just, to me, to Michael Miller Pilates, that point of view, it loses the capacity of being uniformly engaged beyond the end point at the hips. You sacrifice so much in uniform engagement if that's the end of where it happens. Think of teaser, and why teaser, is not in a total neutral spine at the hips, the way I do it. My point about hydraulic is my point about not losing your ability to be uniformly engaged is to recognize or at least I'm pointing to or thinking of, considering, pondering the nature of being uniformly engaged as hydraulic in a way. There's a hydraulic quality to uniform engagement. Because in the engagement, you're seeking to uniformly distribute the load of your body as evenly as you can. And the whole thing about hydraulics is this thing about pressure through fluids and distributing that pressure through the fluid. And in the case of MMP, when you make connections at two endpoints, I think the hydraulics has a comparison to it and a comparison to the results of it. I'm not sure how I want to define that any better than that, but hydraulics, uniform, pressure, see, pressure is uniform. You apply it at one place and yes, it works down through the hose. That's why there's fabric in the hose to reinforce it to be able to maintain its integrity under the pressure. I think of uniform engagement more as a condition, just like I do the core is a condition of one grip. The engagement of core new tension is reaching into that whole bodiness that you're after in the performance of the mat. So that's my thing on hoses. And I've already said too much. My energy's all gone. Number 2 is a question. Is Pilates only folklore? Is Pilates only folklore? Now, what is folklore? Because in my internal dialogue, I always try to understand how I would best explain things. And in talking about the bulk of the way Pilates is perceived and why it's perceived that way, I would suggest that it's all but exclusively folklore in its representation, because folklore is word of mouth. It is passed on by word of mouth. Okay? Folklore, word of mouth. So if folklore means word of mouth, and all that is conveyed within that means of word of mouth, right? Then in some way, in some regards, you could say, yes, that's the only way that Pilates is considered, is via word of mouth. I stopped getting a live broadcast from So if the camera's still going, I have a frozen screen. I will end here and regroup and then just try to get through the whole thing on Facebook coming up. Oh, but see, there I am again. So what to do when your screen freezes? I imagine that's buffering and shading, so folklore. So know that folklore is word of mouth, my understanding of it, and that most of Pilates is folklore, in that it's word of mouth. That's what's being represented is what's being transferred through word of mouth. And to give you a comparison of ways of looking at Pilates, one way other than looking at Pilates through folklore is by theory. And MMP is a theory of Pilates. And so what you would know of Pilates isn't so much by word of mouth as much as it is by understanding of the theory. Now, I said that pretty clearly, I hope. It's understanding the theory. And that's your authority within the point of view. So it doesn't matter who you learned it from. It doesn't matter how long you've known it. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing Pilates. To get a comprehension of the theory. Now everything else, all of the word of mouth folklore, that is a rich way to get exposure to what's going on, has its own appeal and attracts the... No, I can't say that. It helps if I look at my right notes. Folklore. Folklore is what's passed on by word of mouth. And predominantly, almost exclusively, Pilates is considered to be folklore. And only to be folklore, and can only be folklore. Well, hopefully these broadcasts over the years have helped you get a comprehension that MMP comes from a different POV than folklore, different than word of mouth, different than all of the culture, all of the generations, all that's taught and known about Pilates through folklore is word of mouth. MMP isn't folklore, it's a theory based on Joe's book. So if it's word of mouth, it's Joe's words out of his book. And there's my contribution to more tradition, more folklore. It's all folklore to some extent. But to me, what's important for you to appreciate is the point of view that MMP takes that isn't word of mouth based on the folklore of those who knew him, as much as it is based on Joe's words out of his book. For you to take in whatever degree and to whatever extent you're interested or willing or capable. So, having said that, CT is whole body. Like the hydraulics, how do you get to the hydraulics? How do you get to the hydraulics? Well, you have to create oppositional rotation between axes. That's how the body has figured it out over the last couple gazillion years. And in doing that, it creates tension. And in that tension, a lot of things that happen. But what happens to your spine, if we're talking about your spine, like what about like in there like that, is that when you create tension in your body, that's what's going on. And in doing that, you're reaching for an effect of the hydraulics in that your whole body, when you engage yourself uniformly, when you get as much uniform engagement of your musculature as you can, it takes on some quality of what seems to be hydraulics, because there's this uniform aspect to it. And when you break that or move away from the ability to be whole body engaged, right, you lose the effect that you're after, which is to develop the body uniformly. So CT is whole body, and MMP is theory. MMP is not folklore, at least so far as it's only someone interpreting Joe's words. But from those words, establishing or attempting a theory that there's an ideal within the original work. And to the extent that that theory exists, that has a chance of being handed down more consistently and more truly than folklore alone. MMP is theory. CT is whole body. And both of those, even the theory, points to an experience, and CT is definitely an experience in creating tension and in being eccentric, in reaching away and making tension takes 2 points. Life can't live forever. Read between the lines, see behind the curtain. Connect the dots. Evaluate perspectives. Ask for a lot more than you're willing to settle for to get a view of how much value the other person is placing on what they want from you. Look for the karma in it. Reach for more than you expect to get. I think that's a good way to say that. Reach for more than you expect to get. In a way of adding 2 and 2, and then direct your thinking. Geist.